Hello, my name is Stephanie Toddy, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar today entitled Why Learning Outcomes Matter, a Case of Student-Driven Course Development, hosted by Dr. April Fehler, lecturer and researcher from the University of North Texas. Dr. April Fehler has over 15 years of teaching experience in some of the largest state universities in North Texas. She specializes in evaluation research with 6 years in product evaluation at a local marketing research company, 3 years as a program evaluator at Parkland Hospital, and 3 years designing the evaluation model for her academic department at the University of North Texas. Her department's approach to program evaluation has received accolades from her university's institutional research department, as well as those responsible for SACS accreditation for the university. She currently serves as a lecturer for the Bachelor of Arts and Sciences program in the College of Public Affairs and Community Service. Before we begin, I have just a few housekeeping items to go over. If anybody has specific questions, we encourage everyone to type them through the questions feature of the GoToWebinar control panel, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen. April, if you'll go forward one slide so we can just see outline of that. Thank you. Please type those in at any point during the presentation, and we'll have a chance to answer all of those questions at the conclusion of the webinar. Also, at the conclusion of the webinar, you should have a quick survey pop up for you. We encourage everyone to fill that short survey out if possible. It's only 5 questions long. This way we can continue to provide relevant content in all of our presentations. We have several webinars coming up, all of which can be viewed at learn.examsoft.com/resources. But in particular, our webinar entitled Student Stories, How Real-Time Performance Data Can Help Students at Different Levels of Academic Performance, will be held on Tuesday, July 8th by Eric Ermy, Director of Client Solutions for ExamSoft, and formerly the Program Manager for Assessment and Evaluation from the Ohio State University School of Medicine. And yes, because I know everybody will ask, today's webinar is being recorded, and all attendees and registrants will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording in the next day or so. Please feel free to share it among your peers as you would like. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn everything over to April. Thank you so much for attending, and please enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Stephanie. Welcome, everyone. This webinar is Why Learning Outcomes Matter, a Case of Student-Driven Course Development. You know, from the first day of class, instructors usually know what books the students are going to read. We know what's most important for them to learn, and we probably have a good sense of what we need to do to measure how they learn it. A lot of us are going to look at our syllabus and try to figure out ways to shove everything in that syllabus in a 16-week time frame, or sometimes a smaller week time frame, right? So in this case, we also may note that our success is based on some grade distribution for each major exam. But I think there's something more to student learning than our ability to get through topics within a semester's time, and there's more to measuring success than by looking at somebody's grades. So if we could just be intentional about the way we set up our courses, tying the course goals to specific exam questions, we can not only establish a direct link between what they are learning and what we want them to learn, but we can also use that link to monitor and evaluate how well students are learning and determine what we as instructors need to do to make student learning more effective going forward. Now, in this webinar, I'm going to talk about 3 basic things, starting with what instructors can do to set up their courses to measure student learning outcomes from the very beginning. Number 2, how to use student responses to exam questions to identify problem areas within the course. And then number 3, address these problem areas as soon as they're identified to encourage greater learning in the course. I'm also going to talk to you about the kinds of resources that I use that ExamSoft is quite helpful and allowing me to do this. And it allows me to evaluate student learning and facilitate the creation of a course that is based on students and student learning. So I have to tell you, I've spent a lot of years doing this type of thing, and I'm very passionate about evaluation of all kinds. I believe that it is at the very heart of the student-driven course development, and it's really important to me, again, to be very intentional in the way I approach everything in the course, from initial considerations about what to cover to how to collect the information that indicates how well my students are doing. For me, there needs to be a direct link between the goals we set for our students in the course and the assessments we give them to understand what they've learned. And there are a ton of opportunities for learning along the way for both instructors and for students. And if we could just keep an open mind about being able to see these problems as they arise, we can actually improve the learning experience of our students and improve our ability to measure their learning over time. Now, as instructors, we know the most important things that need to be covered, but many times we also know that we are required by our departments, or we may have certification requirements or licensing requirements that we have to keep in mind when we're creating our courses. But what is really less clear is how these course goals, or these most important topics covered in the course, are specifically tied to what the student actually learns. So there's a process of breaking this big subject matter down, right? Learning exactly what kind of details we can measure, getting to finer details that can eventually directly be measured by exam questions. So our first step in student-driven course development starts with a basic overview of how to link course goals to student learning outcomes. I've been teaching some sort of social research methods course for about 15 years as well. And I've approached it in all kinds of ways, changed out articles here, books here, learning modules online, all kinds of writings that I've done, case studies, you name it, I've tried it. And before each course, I sit down and I ask myself what the most important things that I believe students need to know about social research, and I have to sit down and get really serious about what that list is so I can get the top 3 to 5 goals, 3 to 5 most important things that they need to know about social research. And here they are. We've got 4 of them. The first one is to evaluate the knowledge claims of others. How do they know that what somebody is telling them is true? Goal number 2, to determine the role of scientific method in critical thinking. Goal number 3 is test our knowledge claims considering multiple sources and different methodologies. And finally, the last course goal for social research class is to demonstrate the ability to reason analytically. If you note that for each goal, down the right-hand side, you can see where each goal is addressed in each one of these exams. Goal 1 and 2 are addressed in exam number 1. Goal 3 is addressed in exam number 2. And goal 4 is addressed in exam number 3. So imagine, if you will, there are 3 exams in this course, and each one of them have between 40 and 50 questions on them. So let's break down the overall course goals into finer details so that we can see what specific topics should be covered on each exam. I'm going to call this process course detailing. So let's look at goal number 2. Determine the role of the scientific method in critical thinking. Just looking at this goal, in the back of my mind, I'm asking myself, what kind of topics would I need to include for the students so they can get a full understanding about what that role is? What do they need to know about scientific method? What do they need to know about critical thinking? What do they need to know about the relationship between the two? So here's an example of course detailing for goal number 2. So if you look at the very top, goal number 2 is determine the role of scientific method in critical thinking. So now we got to think about what those most important factors are that would describe this goal. And for this example, I came up with 3 different aspects: variables, causation, and experiments. But I know at this point, these are still really broad categories, right? It's not in a place where we can actually get it to be measurable in an exam question. So I want to take this analysis one step further. And I'm going to follow the path from goal 2 down to variables to one more step. So I'm doing the same kind of process again. If I'm looking at variables, what's the most important aspects or dimensions that I need to cover so that my students will understand what variables are? Those 3 options include the types of variables, hypothesis testing, and levels of measurement. So in this particular case, what I'm hoping you're seeing is that there's these numbers that are floating around in these circles and in these rectangles, and they're all kind of helping you organize with numbers how to go from one level of detail to another. So we know that these are all aspects of goal number 2 as a whole, because we have 2.1, which is variables, 2.2, which is causation, 2.3, which is experiments. Then when we detail out variables, you can see how we're coming down one more level. So from variables, which is 2.1, we have types of variables at 2.1.1, hypothesis testing at 2.1.2, and levels of measurement at 2.1.3. So when I think about types of variables, we're now getting to the point where we can start literally asking exam questions. And that's really where the power lies in trying to understand course goals and to make sure our students are kind of getting the idea of what that is. So if we were to follow this path from goal 2 to variables, 2.1, and this path goes down to types of variables at 2.1.1, we can see that there is a link between these, and that if we ask the right questions, they're worded correctly, we've got the right answer categories, and everything's working the way it should, from those exam questions that fall underneath type of variables, we can get a good understanding about what that aspect of the course goal looks like. So at the end of the day, the final output of course detailing is going to be the percentage of correct. In other words, what percentage of students answer the questions correctly? And that's going to be what's really going to drive this entire process of understanding how to measure course goals. The percent correct. This is a really big deal. So I wanted to spend some time looking at this in more detail. All of the levels of detailing are displayed right here. We went from course goal 2 down to one aspect of course goal 2 at 2.1, and then go down one more level of detail at 2.1.1, just like we had before. Except this time, instead of little question marks, I'm giving examples of actual questions that I've asked on my exam. Which describes the independent variable? What variable changes when an experimental stimulus is applied? And which describes a variable and its attributes? So we're getting a sense here, these percentages, which are the percentage correct, we know that 85% of the students that took exam 1, so to speak, got this question correct. And if we move down to question B, we know that 80% of the students that answered this question got that one correct. And down to question C, we know that 75% of the people that answered that question got it correctly. So 75%, 80%, and 85%. That's a pretty good indicator that things are going well. What we can do with that information is that once we have the questions, once we know the percent correct on each question based on students' responses, right? We're able to average these three to get an understanding of what 2.1.1 is. So if I wanted to know how well they're able to describe types of variables, that would be at 80%. Those are pretty good odds, right? You know, this is a really small version of what, an item analysis might be. In this case, if you were doing a real item analysis, these reports are usually really long and include all kinds of statistics on each question. Today, I just wanted to focus solely on the percent correct so we can move through the evaluation portion of our presentation. So as you notice, we're able to average these three questions to get that 80%. One of the things that ExamSoft can do for us is they have the ability to categorize every single question any way you would want to have it categorized, and I do mean any way. So in this case, I spent some time setting up the exam where I could categorize every single question according to the categories that they belonged, right? So with question A, for example, I have assigned a category for 2.1.1, a category for 2.1, and a category for course goal 2. So what that means is that I can actually run summary reports at the end of the day and find out from the exam level, I can use that information, the percent correct, to be able to find out what each one of these levels, what the percentage correct on each one of these levels are on average. One of the reasons why ExamSoft is amazing for this is if you can categorize it in any way you want, there are all kinds of things you can do to categorize your questions and run summary reports to understand how to better address your students' needs. And we'll talk more about that as we go forward. So as we move from measuring student learning outcomes, let's turn our focus to evaluating student learning using several resources available through ExamSoft to make development decisions. And the first one of those is the item analysis. Here we're going to focus on the percent correct. And hopefully the numbering system at this point is relatively familiar to you. It's all starting with that course goal number 2, determine the role of scientific method in critical thinking. The main details or aspects that describe that course goal are 2.1, students will understand the use of variables in social research, and 2.2, where students will understand how to establish causation in social research. But notice how we continue that course detailing. So from 2.1, we go down to 2.1.1, and you can see those similar questions that we looked at before. But in this case, there are several categories under 2.1 to describe the aspects of 2.1. And in this case, we're not only looking just at variables, but we're also looking at hypothesis testing. The exciting part about this is from the very basic understanding of the percentage correct on each question, you're able to learn a lot about the course goal. And so I wanted to make sure that, number one, you know these percentages are the percentage correct, and that I've given you some calculations out to the side that I believe will help you follow what I'm about to say. So just for a moment, let's focus on these questions under 2.1.1. we're trying to describe the types of variables used in social research with these questions. And we know, according to this information, what is the definition of an independent variable? That 96% of the students got it right. That's actually a very good sign. Which of the following describes a variable and its attributes? That next question is at 93%. Again, hooray, this is a good thing. And then what variable changes when the experimental stimulus is applied? That's 72%. It's still over 70. This is good. If I wanted to have a sense or an understanding of what 2.1.1 was, describe types of variable used in social research, I would average those three numbers, those three percentages, which is 261, and divide it by 3, right? So the average of 96%, 93%, and 72% is 87%. So if we look down below it at 2.1.2, where we're trying to describe the components of hypothesis testing, we have two questions there as well. So we're going to attempt to do the same kind of process here. So what is a hypothesis in this research scenario? That's a tough one. And it shows, right? We got a 25% of the students got it correct. And then what is hypothesis testing in and of itself? 81% got that correct. So if I wanted to find out overall how well my students know the components of hypothesis testing, I would do an average between 25% and 81% to figure out what that number is, and it's 53%. It's considerably lower, isn't it? So in this case, watch carefully what happens. If I wanted to get a sense based on the numbers we just calculated, the 53% for 2.1.2 and the 87% for 2.1.1, we know what those are, and I want to find out what the number for 2.1 would be. Students will understand the use of variables in social research. How well do we do? Well, what I look at is the number of the percent correct on all of the questions that fall underneath the light green bar. So we've got 81%, 25%, 72%, 93%, and 96%. If you add all 5 of those numbers up, it's 367. And divide that by those 5 numbers, and we get a number that looks like 73%. Okay, so now we have a sense of what that is. Now we know that 73% is our measure for students will understand the use of variables in social research. But we have more to do, don't we? We still have to get to that course goal level, because that's really what we want to measure in the end. We want to figure out how we can get all of the information we need to understand how well they know course goal number 2. So there's one more piece we haven't looked at yet, and that's 2.2, which is students will understand how to establish causation in social research. So what we have to do is find out what's going on underneath it. And we've got 2 questions. Let's just assume that the questions that are listed here are the only ones representing course goal 2. It makes calculations easier and easier to understand. So what we're looking at here is, what are the dimensions of interpreting correlation coefficients? That's at a 37% of the students got that correct. The question underneath that is, what is Pearson's R? 28% got that correct. If I wanted to find out what the course goal 2 was, I'm going to have to look at all of the questions that are used to measure different aspects of course goal 2 and find an overall average for them. So what you'll see me do up here, to get this 62%, I'm going to have to add up 28%, 37%, 81%, 25%, 72%, 93%, and 96%. That's 7 different percentages, right? So 432 divided by 7, and now we've got a measure for our course goal. Now, if you're anything like me, there's some things on this chart that just doesn't look good. Something's not right. And we've got to figure out what that is. Because technically speaking, I mean, my thresholds, I don't know about you, but I'm thinking 70%, 80% is good. Anything below that, I'm getting a little concerned. But you know, sometimes the questions are harder. And if they're more difficult, you don't expect as many students to get them correct. But I have to tell you, if we're going under 40% correct, you have to wonder what's going on. So what does it mean that we've got a question under 2.1.2 that is only 25% of the students got it correct? Well, it's definitely an indication that something's not right. It could mean that it wasn't taught well enough for students to really learn the material. It could also mean that the source of the information on this question wasn't studied well enough by the students. It may mean that there's a problem with the way the question is asked. It was confusing in some way. They didn't really know what you meant. It could mean that there's a mistake in the key. You need to go back and make corrections on that. Or maybe the answer categories that were available were too similar and they had a hard time choosing. All of these things need to be checked and corrected for future lectures, future materials posted, future exam questions. You know, you got to find out what's going on, what's driving that. And you also have to note that if what they're missing here in these red-lettered questions is a prerequisite for something that's going to happen later on in the course, you're going to have to find a way to reincorporate that so they can get that information before they move on. You're going to have to present it again in a different way and test it again to ensure that the students have learned it so they won't be behind when you present the harder stuff. All of these questions listed can hamper the measurement of what students are learning about goal number 2. If these questions or the curriculum is corrected, these numbers should return to the percentage levels that are probably similar to the other questions. But because we can see what specific parts are problematic, we actually know how to target our efforts now, don't we? We can literally map out ways to improve the course based on student learning outcomes. We know they don't know what Pearson's R is. We know they don't know the dimensions of interpreting correlation coefficients. That whole section right there, they don't know it. And if correlations is going to be important going forward in social research methods, and it is, I'm going to have to go back and reteach this stuff. So this is the type of thing that item analysis can give us by looking at the percent correct. We get great insight on exactly what we need to fix and what's working and what's not working. One of the senses, besides having questions where fewer than 40% are answering them correctly, you have to know that when you get an overall course goal that's less than 70, 75, 80, that something is brewing underneath it. Something is not quite right. And you really do want to show over time that they are meeting their goals. So it will be important over time for you guys to make changes, for us all to make changes so that that number can rise back up, right? Because at the end of the day, not only will department heads be interested in looking perhaps at this information, but I can tell you now, the SACS accreditation people that look at our accreditation for UNT, this information is pretty important to them, especially at the program level. So along with item analysis, ExamSoft also provides other reports that can be used to advise students on what they need to focus on going forward. So let's check that out. You know, it depends on the instructor. I don't normally release these questions or the answers for my exams, but I definitely want to give the students feedback if they're interested in meeting with me about what they missed. And so this is one of the reports that ExamSoft offers that you can run that'll show the specific questions that they missed, exactly what question, the answer categories that are available and the one that they chose versus the one it was supposed to be. Of course, you get the text of the question as well. Our conversations naturally go to understanding why they missed this, and many times it'll also lean on, well, is there anything in particular, is there some sort of trend that you're seeing in the questions that I'm missing that I need to know more about? And with our ability to categorize each question, we literally can send students a report on what percentage of time they answered questions that originated from the book correctly, or online materials, or glossaries. Are they spending enough time studying specific sources? This is one of the benefits of being able to categorize exam questions any way you wish in the ExamSoft system. So here's what a report would look like if I decided to send a report to the students afterwards to help them study better. Check this out. If I wanted a reference, wanted to give the students a reference for future study, this might be one of the things that I could do. ExamSoft creates this automatically. It can automatically tell them what their score is, what the student's score is, and then they can also reveal what the average score is so they can see how they're doing relative to other people in the class. And in this case, one of the things that has helped my students the most, especially in my class, we've got a lot of moving parts in a research methods class. You know, we've got a whole bunch of glossaries because learning research methods is often like learning a new language, right? And so getting them familiar with that language, glossaries can be very helpful if they read them, right? So we've got glossaries, we've got online lessons or learning modules that can take them through some application of the information that they're reading about and that I'm going to be talking about in class. For online classes, I have something called professor's logs, and it's where I spend sometimes between 5 and 10 minutes having coffee, looking at the camera, and talking to the students about the most important issues in the class. You know, have you thought about this? You should consider this, and don't forget this, and this is important, and giving them some examples so they can apply the information better. And so what I found is that the 5 to 10 minute professor's log is actually far more effective, seriously, at conveying the message of giving them applications and encouraging them to do well, and having that face-to-face time than it would be for me to do a full 50-minute lecture on the information that's available online. And of course, textbook chapters, and you could put any kind of category on here that you'd be interested in, but these are the ones that are primarily the most important in my class. And so what they get a chance to see is what percentage of the questions that were from the glossary did they get correct. And so in this case, for this student, student A, we can see that their score is at 100% for glossaries, even though the average score in the class was probably around, I'd say, 83%. So at 100%, that means that he answered all of those glossary questions correctly. That means he's been studying the glossaries, and you can see the green arrow pointing up, thumbs up to them, right? If you look at the online learning modules, however, what you'll see is that the average student, you know, is kind of close, maybe 85%, getting about 85% of the questions about online learning modules correct. But for student A, not so much. Every single question that was asked that was based on information found in the online learning modules didn't get correct. He missed them. Same thing goes for online professor's logs. Even though that might be harder for them to pick out specific details, it looks like they may be running around 70 for the average, you know, percentage correct for questions based on online professor's logs. This person didn't get any of them correct. Textbook chapters, he did much better. He's more, his performance or her performance is more like the glossaries. And so, you know, I can make determinations based on this, and so can this student. They can say, oh my gosh, I should have paid more attention to what was online. And if I had paid more attention to that, we would have done better. In fact, you can see the red arrow pointing downward. Needs improvement, an indicator to them on what they need to do going forward to study more. Okay, so this is a source of questions. Now, for many of you that have very specific certification requirements or licensing requirements, the students know they need to know certain kinds of things, and so listing out the course goals and all the detailing underneath that and how they rate on it as compared to the average student can be very helpful. Also, letting them know that they do really, really well on the really hard application-focused questions, or how they're doing on those hard questions can also be helpful. But there's a lot of different ways, because we can categorize in ExamSoft. We can categorize those questions any way we want. it's one of the ways that we can provide students immediate feedback right after the exam so that they can take matters into their own hand and kind of take some responsibility for catching up and doing better going forward. So something else that's important to getting accurate measurement of student learning outcomes, it's not just the looking at making the perfect exam question or making the perfect detailing of all the course information. We also have to think about exam security. We all know that sometimes our students may be tempted to copy and paste information into essay exams, or they may want to look stuff up in their books during an exam, especially if it's online, right? It's at home. And when I'm teaching online classes, that's the only way I provide exams. So I have to think about security features that are going to help control some of that. Now, it may not get rid of it completely because, we have very innovative students. But it does have some security features that I think can help prevent many of the aspects of cheating. So check this out. I think that these options have been imperative for me. It made me feel a little more comfortable as an instructor knowing that I can program an exam into ExamSoft, and I know that I can randomize the questions and the answers, which makes it a little bit more difficult for people to share that information. I also know that I can prevent backwards navigation, so they can't go back and change an answer once they've answered it, right? They don't have time to go look it up and then come back to it. It's what you answer the first time is what the answer is going to remain. I time the exam, and for me, it is 1 minute per question, although the research that I've done shows that people really answer multiple choice questions in about a third of the time, right? About 20 seconds, 30 seconds at the most. But I give them a minute, and oftentimes it's still not enough time for them to go and look it up, especially if it's quite a detailed question. Computer is also locked down as soon as they download that computer. And download the software, and you download you get the exam from ExamSoft, and as soon as that's opened, everything on your desktop closes down. They don't have access to anything. Internet, Google, whatever, all of that stuff is now gone. So it locks everything down so that you can't have access to what's on your desktop. And the other good thing is that it prevents the use of double monitors. Now, of course, it's not going to prevent them from taking an iPad and doing something with that, but anything we can do to try to increase the security of our exams and our assignments is going to contribute to having more accurate student learning data. The more accurate our data is, the more likely we are to be able to accurately help students in their learning going forward. Another aspect of ExamSoft that my students love is that they don't actually have to take the exam online. At the moment that it's being taken, it's downloaded and it's offline, and then they upload it when they're done. So they don't have to worry about the internet crashing or failing right in the middle of their exam and then losing everything. That's actually quite a fear given some of the storms that we've had up here in Denton recently. So, any concerns that they may have had about the internet interrupting them during their exam it's no longer an issue. One of the things that I also know is that, at least in our department, we've got a lot of students that are working full-time. They're traveling a lot for their work. We've got some veterans that get stationed elsewhere in other countries, and they tend to carry an iPad more often than they do a computer, making it easier to take the exam on a portable device. That is one of the best features of ExamSoft all the way around, is they make it convenient for the student and easy to use, even on an iPad. And that's important because as busy as my students tend to be, I want to give them the best chance they could to learn the information and do everything I can to help them do that. And so if it's more convenient and easier for them to have access to that on an iPad, I want to give it to them. So what have we learned? In this webinar, we've talked a lot about course detailing. The first step to gain control over the course is through course detailing. We want to be able to watch for all the possible opportunities to improve the curriculum, the lectures, the assignments, the assessments, by specifically organizing the exam questions around the details of the course goals, right? So if we're able to identify ways to make that direct link, we do have more control over being able to encourage, facilitate student learning. And we can also make changes to the course going forward. So the second thing, when you've got an exam available, course detailing was done before exams were even given. But now that we've got exams and we're taking them, the item analysis is a good place to focus because you get a chance to see where the specific issues are. And they can help us make decisions about what course issues that our students are having and what we can do to make it better, right? And finally, not only do we have the option to look at item analysis for one exam, but we have the option to look at the item analysis for all the exams, right? So you have to ask yourself, what changes do we need to consider in this course over time? What have our problem areas told us about what the course needs to be to address the student learning needs? Are there any new goals we need to consider? Are there any new aspects of the details we need to consider? Because at the end of the day, we want to be able to give our students something that they can learn effectively from. We want to be the best teachers we can be. We want to be able to provide the evidence that says, yes, they're really learning this. And we want to be able to say at the end of the day that we're facilitating student-driven course design. It's based on what they say. It's based on their exam questions. This is a big deal because we're actually using the information they give us about the way they're learning and making a better product. And that's a good thing. In closing, I usually always have questions. When you're in evaluation, everything's a question. And you have more questions after those questions. But some of the things that I consider when I'm thinking about learning effectiveness and creating a course, I ask myself several questions. Number one, are my course goals linked directly to my assessments? If I adjust those assessments, are they still directly linked? If I have to add an additional goal because of departmental changes or certification changes, is that still measurable in the assessments that I currently have? I think specifically based on item analysis, what changes should be made to these lectures, the material covered, or the assessments to encourage greater learning after each exam? What do I need to do to make this better for them, to be able to teach them more effectively, real time? The moment I find it, how can I fix it? How can I get them caught up to where they need to be so that I can move forward? I also want to think about what kind of feedback I need to give my students so that they can learn more effectively. Is it best for them to know where the sources of information are so that next time they can study those online modules more? Is it better for them to know that they're not meeting this particular objective or they're not doing what they need to do to learn those hard questions? This is the feedback that students need after each assessment in some way. And finally, are there any changes needed in the overall course goals or any levels of detailing to meet the learning needs of future students? Not only are you doing everything you can to improve the learning experience of your current students, real time, using ExamSoft, you're also trying to find ways that students in the next semesters can benefit from what you've learned from the semester before.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, April. We really appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
We're going to go ahead and open up the forum for our Q&A now. Just as a reminder, if you do have questions that you'd like to pose to April, please type them in the questions area of the GoToWebinar control panel, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen. If you type them in there, I'll go ahead and read them out and pose them to April. We've already got a couple, so let's go ahead and get started. The first question is, Do you use detailing with other types of assessments besides exams?
Yes. That's the emphatic yes. Multiple choice exam questions are the easiest way to talk about detailing. But you can also use rubrics, which I think is something else that ExamSoft has been talking about. You can look at papers and the grading of papers. You can look at exercises and assignments and the description of case studies. Any assignment that you use, you could use to measure the course goals. It just may be more difficult to be objective about it without kind of when you have multiple choice questions, it's pretty clear whether you got it right or whether you got it wrong. And so sometimes when you're grading other assessments that are not so clear cut, it may be harder to get a clear percentage correct answer. Because at the end of the day, it's the percentage of correct that you're looking at to measure your student learning outcomes.
Great, thank you. The next question we have is, for accelerated courses, such as 8-week courses, do you make changes immediately or collect data for a year, especially with small classes?
When I have small numbers, I have to remember that the evaluations are going to go all over the place. When you have, most of my data is based on classroom sizes of 65. So I can feel confident that the information that I'm getting is pretty representative of what I need to deal with going forward. If you have small classes, I would recommend taking note of what's going on. If you see something wrong with a key or a question in the exam, you can fix that right away. That indicator is important to check on. But if you are concerned about changing things too quickly, it's all right to wait as long as there's no problem in the way you're assessing it. That's my biggest concern, that you would repeat that while you're waiting for additional semesters of data. You might be repeating a problem that could be fixed right away.
Great, thank you. The next question is, can you design a question STEM to be specific to a goal and standard to ensure that by the end of the term, you have adequately met all goals aligned to these standards?
Question STEM.
So a question STEM, as far as I understand it, would be the actual question part of the item, and then any, like the A, B, C, D choices would be the distractors. So I think the question is, can each specific STEM or the question itself be related back to a goal or standard itself?
Oh, in other words, can you look at the course goals themselves and automatically go to a question instead of having to do the detailing? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think so, yes.
I think it's always possible. In the back of my mind, I don't think of things that way. I think that if you've got specific course goals based on certification requirements or licensing requirements, you may not have to do as many levels of detailing as you would otherwise, because sometimes that stuff is really straightforward and you can measure it, with a very straightforward question earlier on.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, do you do any pre-tests to see where students are at before you begin?
I don't. I do pre-testing in other ways. For example, in a face-to-face class, I have other assignments that I'm having them do to get an understanding of where they stand on what they think about variables, what's going on with that. I give them a chance to interact with what a variable is and how to use it in some of the exercises that I do, some of the quizzes that I do. So I have a sense on where they stand from that perspective, but I don't give them my exam in the beginning of the semester and then give the exact same exam, 4 weeks later. So I have a sense of where they stand, but it's not a direct pre-test, post-test. It's not the exact same question.
Okay, Next question is, do you share the test questions with the percent correct externally, such as for accreditation?
Yes, I do. One of the things that I'm working on now, and I've always been involved in, is that accreditation, at least for University of North Texas, is we've got SACS accreditation that we're dealing with, and they like to look at these numbers at the program level. And so there are ways that ExamSoft can actually be used for the program level so that you can show this information and show amongst several different courses how we're meeting the goals of the program. So yes, it's all based on that percent correct on exam questions. So yes, they do see it. And it is mapped out. I think that's one of the things that our SACS people were so happy about when I started mapping this stuff out and they started seeing the detailing happen. They're ecstatic when they're talking to somebody who can actually take them down to the exam level or the student learning outcome level instead of just assuming that grades would be a best representation. They don't tend to care much for that. So yes, definitely the accreditation folks, they love this kind of stuff.
Great, thank you. Next question is, and it looks like we might have time for this one last one. Okay. Folks, if we haven't gotten to your questions, because there are quite a few, we can follow up with you and address them via email, so not to worry. Looks like we've got time for one more. Last question is, were your learning objectives determined or mandated for you, or did you write your own?
I wrote my own. When I first started teaching many moons ago, I took a syllabus from somebody else, so I had some starting point of what they thought or what the department might have thought was important. But over time, with multiple researches and textbooks and different modules and things that I've learned over time, these were the most important characteristics that I believe they needed to know to understand how to do social research. So the ones that you saw today are straight out of my my course detailing. It's straight out of the stuff that I've sent to SACS before.
Great. Thank you so much, April. Really appreciate it. And we really appreciate everybody taking time out of their day to be here for today's webinar. Again, just want to mention to everybody, this webinar has been recorded, and if you have joined us today, or even for your colleagues who weren't able to join us, if they're registered, you guys will all get an email within the next 48 hours that will have a link to the recording of the webinar for you to share as you would like to. Once again, I just want to say thank you for being here. We're glad you could make it. Please make sure you fill out that quick survey that will pop up for you here in just a second as you exit out of the presentation. We really appreciate your feedback, and we look forward to having you again at another webinar. Thanks so much. Everybody have a great day.